Should you go with a bioactive or a simpler setup for your animal? Hi guys, welcome and welcome back to my channel. So oftentimes, especially on my bioactive setup videos, I get the question, should I have a bioactive setup? And I want to say before I get into some of the more pros and cons of bioactive versus simplistic versus naturalistic setups, that there really isn't a right answer to that question. It all depends on you and what you want to do and what you feel comfortable with. So let's get into that. First, I want to talk about bioactive setups. The biggest pros to bioactive setups are that they mimic the animal's natural environment. I think that in terms of practicality, certain animals are more practical to have a bioactive setup than others. Not to say that you can't do it, just saying that those are easier. For example, any kind of arboreal animal like crested and gargoyle geckos, emerald tree boas, green tree pythons, day geckos, green anoles, anything that's going to stay in kind of a rainforesty tropical environment, those are going to be so much easier to have full-blown bioactive setups for, because the isopods and the springtails, they thrive in wet climates. The plants are usually kind of easier to get, and for the most part, those animals aren't going to destroy the tank that you put them in. That's why the only bioactive setups that I've actually ever stuck to are the ones for my crested gecko. Another very big pro to those bioactive setups is going to be the fact that they are self-cleaning. For the most part, that's one of the biggest appeals to bioactive setups. While you will still have to clean up things like urates, and you'll probably still have to spot clean a little bit, and of course you are going to have to occasionally clean out the substrate, the cleanup crew is basically going to do most of that for you. What that cleanup crew is going to do is break down those animal waste and mold and things like that, and they turn it into nutrients for your plants. Basically, one big indicator that you need to go in and do a full cleaning of the tank is if it starts to smell bad. But other than that, you're not really going to mess with it except for spot cleaning urates and of course cleaning the glass, because the cleanup crew is not going to clean your glass for you. Yeah, it's basically a self-sustaining tank. Another huge pro is that it mimics the animal's natural environment. It's actually kind of crazy the night and day behavioral differences that an animal will have if put on paper towels or tile versus in a more naturalistic environment. So on to the cons. So the biggest one that I found with my leopard gecko, and the reason that I switched her to having a large portion of her tank be tile and then a naturalistic spot, was that she would get dirt everywhere. So she loves to dig, and that's why she still has her spot. But every single morning I would wake up and her water bowl would be mud and her calcium dish would be dirt. And this kept happening over and over and over again, and I was having to clean out her tank over and over and over again. Another giant con that I specifically experienced, but that's probably just me, I've always had terrible luck with plants, and that is keeping those plants alive. So when I had her tank set up, her succulents would die. And succulents are supposed to be one of the easiest things in the world to take care of, and I failed. With the crested gecko tank, I had a lot more luck. The first round of plants, I've had 2 rounds of plants now. The first one died, but it was after, it took a while. It took quite a while for those plants to die. And I just redid the tank and they're growing and looking fantastic. So if you're not good at plants, that is a huge possibility for you, because it is a bioactive setup, so you have to have real plants in there. Another thing about bioactive setups, I guess you could consider it a con, but it's more of just another requirement, is that you're gonna have to have grow lights. So even on animals that don't necessarily need lighting on the physical tank, like crested and gargoyle geckos, because they are nocturnal, you're gonna have to have lights on there to grow those plants. Now let's talk a little bit about simple setups, is what I like to call them, and that's having your reptile on things like paper towels, tile, or reptile carpet, anything like that. So first of all, I do want to say that if you have this sort of setup, the most unsanitary of the setups is gonna be reptile carpet. Paper towels or tile are going to be a million times more sanitary than reptile carpet, just because with reptile carpet, parasites have the ability to kind of burrow down into that carpet, and unless you are thoroughly disinfecting it very often, then there's a very high chance that you can have parasites burrowed in that carpet, especially for things like bearded dragons who are already prone to getting parasites. But one of the biggest pros, especially if you do paper towels and tile, is the ease of cleanup. So with paper towels, you just pull out the paper towels, throw in new ones, and you're good to go. If you have tile, you just pull out the tile, scrub it with some Dawn dish soap or reptile disinfectant, throw it back in there, and you're good to go. Especially for things like bearded dragons who, when they use the bathroom, it is not fun to deal with. Things like paper towel and tile are going to be super easy to deal with if you don't want to deal with a bioactive setup. In addition, if you're going to do tile, then you also are going to have the pro of your animal's nails filing themselves down. And I do want to also say that if your animal is brand new to you and you're quarantining them, or if you suspect that they're sick or that they have mites or parasites or anything like that, having them on a more sterile paper towel lined enclosure is going to be so much better for them, because that doesn't give the opportunity for all that loose substrate to stick in wounds. Again, when Percy was on that bioactive setup, she lost last third of her tail when she most likely pulled it off during a shed. Now, the first thing I did when I noticed that she had lost that half of her tail was to pull her out of that tank and put her in a more sterile tank on tile, so that that loose substrate wasn't getting into that open wound, just because it can cause infections. So tanks like that are great for when sickness or injury or anything like that happen. And a big pro for some of you, tanks like that give you more creative freedom. So with Zaz, yes, she is a desert animal, but when I had her on the reptile carpet, I was able to design her an entire forest-oriented tank, and it had absolutely nothing to do with bearded dragons or anything like that, but I was able to put the fake leaves going up the walls, and I was able to build her stairs with carpet, and I could do all these things because I wasn't limited to having to have soil and plants in it. This may be a pro and it may be a con. It depends on how you look at it. With a simplistic setup, it's always going to be the same. That tile's not going to change, those hammocks aren't going to change, and those fake plants aren't going to change. It always stays how you design it. So the cons of a more simple setup. Number one is, like I said, if you use anything like reptile carpet, you do increase the risk of parasites repopulating themselves into that carpet. But the biggest con that I've seen, and really the only con at that, is your animal can get bored. Percy was so bored on that tile setup, and I didn't even know until I moved her to her bioactive setup, and she actually had things to do and she did them. I've thought about moving my bearded dragon to a bioactive setup because I feel like maybe she's bored, but then I remember that she won't even walk over to her food bowl unless I pick her up and physically move her there. So I don't think a bioactive setup would be very practical for her, because I honestly don't think she would do anything. She won't even feed herself. But for most other normal animals, they might be bored, and it's kind of sad, I guess, to think of if they're just kind of stuck in a room with nothing to do. But that's really the only con that I can think of. If you're giving them climbing space and all of that, and they have space to run, and they're on a simple setup, then they're probably fine. So I had an entire section recorded here about going with a more naturalistic setup, and what I was trying to say made absolutely no sense. So I decided just to put in this footage, and I know it's repeated footage, so sorry. But if bioactive or simple setups don't work for you, you can always go with an in-between. I like to call this a more naturalistic setup, but it's not actually naturalistic, because a true naturalistic setup is basically the same as bioactive minus the cleanup crew and the microorganisms. So Percy's tank here has half of a simple side with tile, for easy cleanup, and have a naturalistic side where she can dig and do all of her fun things that she likes doing. There are real plants in this tank, but at the same time her hides are not real. I consider this a more naturalistic setup because this is more like a natural environment than, say, carpet and a rainforest background. If you wanted something to meet in the middle, you could always do something like this, and it kind of gives you freedom to do your tank however you want in terms of it being more natural, if that makes any sense. This same concept can be used for a chameleon tank where you use reptile carpet but a potted plant in the middle because it's kind of a little of both, as well as a snake tank where you could just go all bedding but have fake plants. And then we look at Goliath's tank, who has cocoa fiber and a rainforesty look, but it's all fake minus his core part. With this way of setting up a tank, you can literally go as big as you want or as small as you want. My point being here with this naturalistic setup section is that it doesn't have to be black and white, and that's one of my absolute favorite parts of owning reptiles, is designing those tanks. And there's so many different ways that you can design those tanks. Honestly, I think that for the most part, as long as you are providing everything for your animal that it needs, so you are providing them the proper temperatures and humidity and water and food and vitamins and minerals and lighting and everything that it needs to survive, as long as you're providing all that, then you can really do whatever you want with their tank. I get some negative comments on Zaz's original forest setup because people get upset because she's not in the environment that she would be in the wild. I always think that it's the silliest thing because your bearded dragon or your leopard gecko or whatever, they were born in captivity. They don't know what their natural environment looks like. Your animal's not going to be upset if you decide to put cute little decorations in there, or you want your ball python set up to look like a castle or whatever. They're not going to know. All they care about is that they have their basic necessities. Now, of course, I'm not advocating for keeping them on anything that's not safe for the animal, but in terms of things that are safe, do what you want. Do what makes you happy. So to answer that question that I get all the time, should I make my animal's tank bioactive? Do what you want. If you want to make it bioactive, go for it. If you want them to be on tile because that's what makes you feel comfortable, go for it. Do whatever you want visually for your animal, as long as you are providing them with a safe and effective place to live that has all of their necessities. And that's about all I have for you guys this week. If you enjoyed this video, check out my education playlist and you can learn some more about some awesome reptiles. Quick disclaimer, as always, I'm not an expert. I just do a lot of research and relay that information to you guys. So if you are thinking about getting any kind of new pet, please do a lot of research, and make sure that you are providing the best home possible for your animal. If you want to see pictures and videos of my animals throughout the week, you can head on over to Instagram and follow me there at l.622, where you can do just that. I wanted to give a huge shout out and thank you to Asherfield21 and TC Love B-Ball. Thank you guys so much for following me on Instagram and going through and liking a whole bunch of my pictures. You guys are the bee's knees. If you like this video, please feel free to like this video, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. I put out new videos every single Sunday and new vlogs every single Wednesday. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.